Hello, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome to my PowerPoint today, which is on the subject of why water is, in fact, wet. So, in order to understand why water is actually wet, we first have to understand why anyone wouldn't think water was wet. So let me just explain it to you real quick. This is kind of a theory that was just born on the internet. It was a bit of a meme, but I feel like it's taken on a more serious tone as people actually start to believe it. This theory comes from the definition of wet, which states that wet is an adjective used to describe the feeling of a surface covered in water. The heathens, who believe in an unwet water, claim so by pointing out that in order for something to be wet, it must be covered in water. By this token, water cannot be wet as it cannot be covered in itself. I mean, honestly, this seems like a watertight explanation. How are you supposed to, how is water supposed to be wet if it can't be covered in itself? But, is that true? I mean, is it really? Is that really the end of the story? Well, luckily for you, ladies and gentlemen, I would like to tell you that is in fact not the end of the story, as I have created my own theory, which I call the molecular water theory. God, all these R's in this font look like N's. That's really annoying. Anyways, as you see here, we have 9 molecules down here. We're going to consider them as molecules of water, and if you look at them closely, you have the top water molecules and the bottom water molecules. Now, what does this mean? It's very simple. The top water molecules are on top, and the bottom water molecules are on the bottom. Yeah, that's about it. You got the ones that sit on top of the water and the ones that sit on the bottom. The top ones are the ones that will be, exposed to air out in the open, and the bottom ones are the ones that are covered by the top water molecules. So, this is more or less the theory. It just needs a bit more explaining, which I will have in the next slide, and you'll understand. At any given point on an object that is covered in wet, technically the amount of water surrounding most parts of its surface should be thicker than one molecule, or else the quality of its wetness cannot be noticed. Therefore, when you touch your hand to the surface, you are actually not touching the surface at all, but the top water molecule like the ones pictured below. In between the top molecules and the surface will be the bottom water molecules, which act as a barrier between the top molecules and the surface in question. This essentially means that when you touch the wet object, you are not touching the object being referred to at all, or even the water being on that object to the cushioned bottom water molecules. You are only touching solely the water in the equation. So with this being said, if you were to take, say, a body of water and touch it, you would be experiencing the exact same phenomena of top water molecules and bottom water molecules that would make any normal surface act as wet. In a sense, this surface that would be covered in water would be the bottom water molecules, and so they would be, in turn be covered in top water molecules. So by the non-wet people's own theory, they have basically proven the wetness of water. Now, I know that was a lot, but all you really need to know is, basically, I'm right, you're wrong, I'm a winner, go cry. Yep. Pretty simple. But, ladies and gentlemen, I hear you all saying it. I hear it. That wasn't true. You don't believe me, do you? Huh? Is that not enough for you? Was all that explanation not enough for you? Well, then I have another theory. And this one's much simpler, really. I call it the infinite object theory, and basically, the explanation for this theory is much simpler. It's just it basically states that at any given point, water is on top of any surface, whether it be the condensation on your water bottle or the Pacific Ocean that rests on the top of the Earth's crust, or in some places, the Earth's outer mantle. This basically means that any water you ever touch is the result of it being collected on one surface or another. Therefore, in any water situation, what you are touching has to be wet, as it is merely water on a surface. This basically means, if you're touching water that's in a bucket, it has to be wet because it's on the bucket. That's the surface it's on. Or, if you get into Lake Michigan, what's the surface that it's on? Well, it's on the continent of America, more or less. It's got the ocean, or not the ocean, the lake floor underneath it, and that is the object that is wet. So technically, as you're swimming in that water, it is in fact wet. You get it. Yeah, so that's the end of my presentation, and, I hope you learned something from this presentation. The biggest thing I hoped you learned is just that water is, in fact, wet, so stop being dumbasses and start using your brain for once. I mean, who would have thought? Wet water. God, what a concept. I don't know why I got so heated about this, but this actually makes me angry.